So welcome everybody to the Integrate Yourself podcast with Allison and Maja. We're your hosts, Allison, Pelot, and Maja Gottlieb. Today, we're going to have a topic show, and this is inspired by some questions and comments we had on our social media. And we're going to talk specifically about good fats, bad fats, and what that means exactly, and what really bad fats really are, and good fats really are, according to what we've researched and found out. But yeah, so I definitely think this is a huge subject because I think there's still so much confusion around the fat thing, mainly because a lot of the fats that are actually, as you and I know, Maja, that are pretty harmful for the body are still being marketed to people as health foods. And one of those is specifically fish oil, and we can talk about why that's not really good for the body. But the question, actually the statement that I had come up on social media was around PUFAs and, nuts and seeds and stuff like that, and how those, she was wondering how those can actually inhibit her digestion and how what the fats in those nuts and seeds have to do with that. So we could probably start out with that and explaining how nuts and seeds really harm the digestive motility, as well as they can create dysregulation in your hormonal system.
What I thought maybe we could go to is exactly what nuts are, and nuts are exactly what seeds are. So looking at Kate Deering's book was a real eye-opener in that statement, because they all have the same thing. The inhibitory of mineral absorption because of the blockage of the protein enzymes in terms of the protease. And what also is they have the tryptophan inhibitors. They have the oxalates, the phytates, and lectins. Right. So maybe we could go into individually what each one of these are. So the trypsin inhibitors inhibit protein digestion.
Which is a big one because a lot of people eat nuts and seeds for protein, right?
Right. And so what happens is it prevents the protease enzymes from digesting the protein. So a lot of people think, I'm going to eat nuts to supplement my protein intake. And the problem is that because the body doesn't want to go ahead because the nuts already have this trypsin inhibitor, they can't absorb because it blocks that digestion ability, so that you're really not getting what you think protein-wise from this nut is. And
it's good to know that happens, but we also want to know why that happens in nature. And it's a mechanism that Mother Nature has put in those nuts and seeds so that they can germinate later, right? So they're not ingested.
Right.
And they need to make whatever is eating them sick, basically. Yeah.
They need to protect the seed, which is inside the nut. Like the nut itself, it has its own seed, and the seeds themselves have the part that needs to generate for the next generation of the plant. And so it is going to be in that nut. And when you try to digest it, you're actually keeping yourself from having the ability to do that, because you just don't have the digestibility to break down that inhibitor. Reason why animals that eat nuts, like bears and chipmunks and squirrels and all that, is that they want this for hibernation. Right. Like this is going to help them slow down their metabolism for the winter months. So when you think about why someone's eating something, which is a real good opening to yourself of why you eat things, is that they're going into hibernation. Now, we don't go into hibernation. So simulating this food is going to create the same thing in those animals versus us. So we're kind of getting into also that part of what the nut has is higher levels of PUFAs, which we talk about, which is the polyunsaturated fats.
And what you are just polyunsaturated fats? Let's just kind of define that really quick for everybody.
Right. They're long chain fatty acids that basically they don't have the hydrogen on the ends of this of the long chain. So there's a bit of a breakdown when you have to eat those. So one of the issues is whether or not you can function while you're eating these things, because they're actually made to protect the body in terms of keeping the metabolism slowed down, because they take so much energy, right?
Right. So yeah, so we're actually suppressing our metabolism when we're eating these kinds of foods.
Absolutely.
We're actually slowing it down. Yeah. So what else what else are in nuts and seeds? You mentioned oxalates and phytates, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
So oxalates are the ones that bind to calcium. And so when you can't get oxalates actually take the calcium out of the body and create kidney stones. So those are the one things that you have to be careful about, because osteoporosis is when the body doesn't get enough calcium and starts pulling it from the bones. And then if you think about what we're doing when we eat something that also takes the calcium away, you are reducing your calcium ratio, which is basically something you need to balance with the phosphorus. And phosphorus is correlating to the phytates, because the phytase is phytic acid, and it's basically a storage form of phosphorus. And so if your ratio of calcium to phosphorus is out of balance, more phosphorus than calcium, you're doing exactly what osteoporosis does. It is limiting your calcium intake for your body.
Yeah, that's a big one, because I think the whole osteoporosis thing is really, really misunderstood about how that all works, right? Because it's really about the calcium it's not that you don't have enough calcium, it's that your calcium is being put in the wrong place.
Yeah,
taken and
exactly.
put in the wrong place. Yeah. So that's one thing I like about, protein sources such as dairy, because it has a really, really great calcium to phosphorus ratio, instead of like nuts and seeds and grains, which have a very high phosphorus count, right?
Right, which are vegetables, like certain vegetables have high phosphorus. So that's why raw vegetables are kind of in the same category, is that they block the ability for you to have calcium also, because they have a high ratio of phosphorus in them.
Yeah.
And we're looking at, when we talked about the polyunsaturated fats, what we also talk about is how they are higher in certain plants and nuts and seeds, is because they protect the plant themselves from the cold weather. That means that when you have an oil that is liquid in cold weather or cold temperatures, it means it's already being oxidized. So the oxidative mechanism that your body does on its regular cellular respiration is being blocked. The body temperature starts to lower to conducively process all these that are limiting the body's processing abilities. So
and that's a huge thing too, because we don't want lower body temperature. That's an indication that our thyroid is slowing down, correct?
Well, I always like to say it's like you're cooking a turkey in a 250 degree oven that for like 2 hours, right? You're anticipating somehow this thing is going to get fully cooked in less amount of hours that it needs, and it's basically going to not heat up in the internals. It's just going to heat on the outside, and so everything slows down, right? You can't do anything. It's basically where fatigue comes into play, right? When we're trying to energize ourselves, right? We're working out, we're working hard, and some people say, either I get really hot or I get really cold after I work out. And these are still symptoms of the body not regulating itself, because the blood sugar either dropped while they're working out, or they're putting themselves in a situation of high cortisol draws that are causing more stress. And so it takes them longer to regulate their temperature. What we're looking at is the combination of how the body is getting delayed in its functionality, right?
Yeah.
We want the body to function normally. And if our body temperature is low, then we're going to go into things like cold hands, cold feet. We're getting into the ability for the thyroid to produce, the liver working way overboard. So it's a trickle effect of issues, right?
Oh.
And the last thing I know we didn't talk about yet is the lectins, and the lectins interfere with the plasma repair in the gut lining. So nuts and seeds do have those too. You're having more difficulty digesting because you can't repair quick enough to fight what's happening in the digestion. So if you have inflammation already in your gut, you're actually then having more put into it. So then the lectins are basically slowing down any repair, or when it sheds itself, right? So the endotoxins build up.
So you're never able to repair the gut lining, basically, is what you're saying. Yeah.
Right. And when then also the bacteria start to grow, which we talk about in endotoxins, right? Because that is a feeding area for those endotoxins.
And if your digestion is slower, that makes it even worse. Things just sit there and ferment, and more endotoxins get created. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And we're kind of looking at all of these, 5 things we talked about: trypsin inhibitors, oxalates, phosphates, and lectins.
Polyunsaturated fats.
Polyunsaturated fats. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I had to really enjoy about reading, and I'll quote this again, is because you never really think about how much fat is in your food. And when you do, you start to, put it in a Kroger meter, or you do some kind of determinant of what you need to, what you eat, right? Mm-hmm. Well, nuts and seeds actually have a high level of fat. And so if you're thinking about how you want to lose weight, but you want to increase your protein intake, actually, nuts and seeds, or nuts especially, have a lot of higher fat, but it's not the healthier fat because it's the polyunsaturated fats, right?
Yeah.
So you're kind of hitting yourself in two different directions, right? You're weakening your liver ability, and you're actually ingesting more fat that you didn't want in the first place.
Yeah.
And also that part is fats are where the toxins from like pesticides, herbicides come into. So if you're not purchasing organic nuts and seeds, or you are getting things that you're not even soaking, allowing itself to break that phytate down, you're basically creating the same storm of issues. So the digestibility, the increase of fat, because the fat itself carries the toxins. Right. You got to break down all that. Then like high content of fat actually affects the liver itself, right? Because we have to, think about that process too.
Yeah. So even if you do soak them and you get organic and all of that, like it's still going to have the polyunsaturated fat.
Right. And it's going to only be like 20% protein that you're getting from it if you can digest it. Yeah. Even any part of it. So
to me, it's just not worth. It's not worth that kind of work. It's not worth the risk that you're taking to eat those. That's why I recommend taking those out first for everybody that I work with, and replacing it with good protein sources like dairy is one. And we can talk. We'll talk in another show about how you can work dairy back into your diet, because right now I know it's a big thing for a lot of people not being able to take in dairy, and Maya and I have a theory about why that's happening, and we'll share that with you guys. But sticking with what we're talking about today with PUFAs, one of the go ahead.
And really quick, I would say when we say dairy, it's not always just milk, right? There's cheese, and so we're not. We know people have issues around lactose, but we will talk about that in another episode.
Yeah. Yeah. And it has actually a lot to do with what we're talking about today. So we'll weave that in. So one question I received was about menstrual migraines. She asked what causes menstrual migraines, and this can be a loaded question. There can be many, many answers for this one, although she has been eating a lot of nuts and seeds recently, and as we know, with eating having a high consumption of nuts and seeds in the diet, it does create more estrogen in the body, and then what that can do is throw off your estrogen, progesterone ratio, since progesterone, like we talked about in the other show, actually offsets the estrogen. So estrogen in high levels can cause migraines. Let's go from there and kind of talk about how what nuts and seeds have to do with that, and how polyunsaturated fat has to do with that as well.
So most of the time, people who eat nuts and seeds are also eating legumes, and legumes are literally like nuts and seeds because they do have the anti-nutrients, the lectins, they have the phytates, the protease inhibitors, and the oxalates, and the polyunsaturated fats. So if you look at how we just described all of what this does to your digestion, to your energy, to your oxidative mechanisms, you're slowing everything down. And when you kind of produce this slowdown, you're actually holding on to more of the stress hormones that will induce more estrogen in your body because it is the regulator to it. So it's kind of like what you talked about, I think, in one of our episodes where we need estrogen to help our menstruation, right? Mm-hmm. Especially for that.
To kill the cells, basically.
Right. Yeah. So the body is just doing what it's needing to do. It's got a lot of processing it's trying to do with all these seeds, nuts, grains, and legumes. And so it's sending out more signals to go, oh, let's have more estrogen here because it's going to break down these cells. But its accumulation is creating more of the same. And so if you think about what happens to our bodies when we have lots of estrogen, we have a lot of more water in our cells. We have more of the swelling and inflammation because the cells are fighting to kind of stay alive while they're being inhibited by the estrogen. So when we kind of look at how the body responds in terms of where we gain weight, where we how our cycles are working, what we're eating is influencing how we can regulate everything.
Yeah, and the way I also see this is if your digestion slows down, the estrogen actually that's supposed to be excreted out through the intestines actually gets reabsorbed in the intestines if digestion is slow. So that's another issue. Now you have estrogen recirculating into the body and getting into the cell, which is supposed to just be straight out of the body if everything is going well and working properly. So that's another reason why I always tell people improving your digestion can actually improve hormonal balance just by getting excess estrogen out of the body.
And how the carrot is helpful to remove the estrogen and help the endotoxins that are in there too.
Because of its antifungal properties, antibacterial properties, it's in the ground, so it has to have those kinds of properties to actually survive. And so that's the one thing that I do recommend raw for people as far as vegetables go. That's the only one that I recommend raw. Or that we do, and because the fiber in the carrot when eaten raw actually acts as a detoxifying agent, a natural detoxifier to pull out those endotoxins in the gut, and then it actually aids and creates more digestive motility naturally without you having to do too much. And it's funny, I find that people are doing all these crazy things. People are going to practitioners that are telling them to take all these supplements and do all these, crazy diets. When, I think a lot of improvement can probably be made if you're just taking the nuts and seeds out and then adding a carrot in a day. You'd be freaking amazed at how much better you'd probably feel after that. That's just my guess, because I've known people that have done that and have had experience that, and I've done it myself.
I think what really came about with all the nuts and seeds was this fascination about how we needed enough protein. And we do need protein in our diet. But the thing is that as our metabolism started to slow down, people weren't able to digest things. And the meat was one of them. And so they started to pick on like how bad meat was, and the farming that they did, where they do this massive injections and put them on these factory farms. It was not healthy meat, but also there was a push to say, well, we're not digestible meat for meat. And what happened was, I think another little trend came in with that protein was, well, there's alternative sources. It kind of like made into a snowball effect that you need high protein. The factory farming is bad, but we still, we can eat other things. Well, if you then look at who likes to market on big products, the nuts and seeds, the legumes, everything got a good push for what they believe is research science backing.
Yeah, that but industry really grew big time. It's making a ton of money now. Yeah. Yeah.
And but if you really break it down and try to figure out how much protein you're getting from the nuts or the seeds or the legumes, you're really less than what you really think. Yeah. And there is a protein digestible corrected amino acid score that's out there. But in terms of the way it's being talked about, it's not actually correct. It actually causes some people to see it in a way that they don't understand it. So it's like when we talked about the glycemic index, right? Mm-hmm. Certain things are, seen as bad, but in actuality, what they're not putting in there is what is really being digested, right?
So, yes. Yeah. It's how it assimilates in the body, basically.
Yeah.
Similar to what we talked about with the bone broth episode. It wasn't tested for these minerals, but what happens apparently, from what I learned actually, was that it aids the absorption of the minerals that you already have in your body. So in a way, it does increase those minerals, right?
Right. Gelatin is another thing. Casein can be used even, if people don't like the way milk is. There are options to kind of change how you get your protein. And so it's kind of a catch-22 when people think that all they need to do is, pop some nuts and seeds and they've got a lot of protein. It looks great on your chronometer, but it doesn't really help you realistically because you're creating a lot of more undigestible problems. So
right, yeah, and that's how we get into a state of malnourishment when we're eating all this food, but we're not actually digesting it. And that's a huge problem. So
you're really just restricting calories, right? Yeah. In some in densities and stuff where you're really finding, ratio to fat to protein higher. And fat to protein ratio is higher in nuts versus what you're really getting.
So this person had a question about decreasing PUFAs. She said, we need to stop eating olive oil and pumpkin seeds and nuts and hemp seeds and chia seeds. Is that correct? And so, yes, I would say all these fall under that because they do have a high amount of polyunsaturated fatty acid, like we talked about earlier, which are very unstable fats, and they block digestive enzymes. Go ahead.
The olive oil is a monosaturated fat.
So I meant to point that out. That's actually different. That's not a polyunsaturated. So that's
as long as you don't cook with it, you're actually creating less oxidation to it. So, what olive oil contains is definitely not the same as a pure polyunsaturated fat or vegetable oil.
All right. So what we would recommend instead, and again, hemp seeds, chia seeds, these are all marketed to people as health foods, but they actually can slow digestion down, and like what we've talked about earlier in the show, they can do all those things because they have all the protein absorption inhibitors, as well as they just slow down your digestion. But they're a big thing to sell in the market. They last on the shelf for a really long time, and it's something that they can sell to people that people will believe is healthy. So another thing I wanted to bring up here, just quickly about what are the good fats then? If we're talking about bad fats, saturated fat from healthy meat, but also butter, cream, and coconut oil would be your best saturated fats.
Ghee.
Ghee.
Definitely
Yeah,
ghee.
definitely ghee. And what would ghee be for people who can't, who have like a dairy issue?
It's goat, so it's
it's
a
from
goat.
goat. Okay. Oh,
Yeah.
cool. All right. I did not know that. Yeah. And then of course with dairy, yeah, you could go to goat cheese and goat milk too.
We do recommend, if people do love their seeds, nuts, and legumes, is that they at least try to do it either once a week to once a month, to limiting the amount that you have and seeing how better your digestion gets from that. So macadamians, hazelnuts, and cashews are a little bit better than, say, a walnut, almonds, which are higher in the saturated fat list.
Macadamias have some saturated fat in them, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's what kind of balance it out, right?
Yeah.
So the saturated fat actually helps the oxidation mechanism. So there's another part of why those are better for you versus what everyone's telling you about in terms of unsaturated fats.
Again, then we did address the sprouting nuts and seeds for consumption. They can make them more bioavailable. So if you are going to do that once a month or every so often, definitely buy them yourself, buy them raw, and then sprout them, and that would be the best way to be able to digest them.
Right, soaking them in water for at least 24 hours. Some people say 48 hours, allowing the breakage of the seed to sprout its new growth, and then from there you can cook them, or add them with some saturated fat. So with butter, cream, something like that counteracts the phytates that are still in there. You can't get them totally out, but you can definitely limit them. And cooking them for your legumes.
I wonder if like cooking them in coconut oil would help as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Coconut oil, all the fats that you just talked about.
So I think we already addressed this, but it says, although I think hemp seeds should be a little different than the rest of the seeds because they contain significant amino acids and protein per serving. So we already talked about how it doesn't, the measurement of protein in a seed or nut is going to be not so accurate because you're not going to be able to absorb the protein simply because of the protein inhibitors that it contains. As far as the amino acids, same thing. You're not going to be able to access that. The good amino acids from that. The best amino acids would be from gelatin. Those are the most anti-inflammatory amino acids.
Well, first of all, I would say that this hemp seeds, if you're buying anything that's already packaged, they haven't soaked them and they haven't done anything to sprout them. So you're looking at a product that is basically could be organic, but it is still got a high level of the phytates. And so even hemp seeds, they also contain the estrogen. So if you kind of think about what it's doing the same thing we just told.
Yeah.
So.
And this woman, if you are experiencing migraine headaches, then that's definitely going to be one you want to stay away from. Okay. In your talk, can you also include info on sprouted vegan protein supplements, whether or not they can cause problems? And I'm thinking that's very likely. However, I'm very concerned there will be nothing I can eat because I refuse to bow to industrial farming and their destruction. So I agree with that statement. I don't think that we should bow to industrial farming and the destruction that it has already incurred on our system. But at the same time,
support your local farmer that you know and have researched and found that he's concerned about his animals and his farm and doesn't want to feed his animals high soy or things that will fatten up his animals in a faster time. Then you'll definitely keep that whole industrial system slowed down, because you may never stop them, but for sure you can keep them from, getting your dollars, because it's important to kind of support your local farmers and people that because you have farmers markets all over. There's people online you can reach out to. Now you can get from Amazon itself. You can totally get, next day service, right? frozen meats,
Yeah.
So there's ways around, and you don't have to support those things, but you don't have to give up on your metabolism because you think there is nothing left to eat. It's just understanding what's going on with the information that's provided,
Yeah.
It's,
Absolutely. And that's part of what we want to help people with, is to discover there's so much that you may be able to eat that you didn't realize you could eat just because your digestion was in a certain state. And actually pulling yourself out of that suppressed metabolism, suppressed metabolic state can actually open the world up for more food for you. We tend to want to do things all at once. And I know I've been one of those people many times. But what I've learned is, if you're giving yourself space to actually feel what's happening to your body and tune into that, that's really what's important, because that's how you're going to learn what works for you at what stage of your health and how your body is responding to it. But if you do everything all at once and really quickly, you're going to probably have a bunch of symptoms that don't make sense, and you're going to say, oh, that just doesn't work, and you may even give up on it altogether. So that's why it's like taking the time to actually become aware of what is going on in your body, because your body needs to work in incremental ways. It can't handle everything all at once all the time, especially if you're not in a very high metabolic state. I did want to comment real quick on the Sprouted vegan protein supplement. So I would say, all supplements, this goes for all supplements, just make sure if you're taking a supplement that it has real food in it, doesn't have a bunch of crap in it. And there's all kinds of things that they add to supplements. So consider like what that's doing, how much work that's putting your liver under when you're taking a supplement. And consider also that maybe just taking that supplement out of the diet, you might not need that supplement. You could, then your liver would work better, and then therefore your body would feel much better because you're taking that layer of work away for the liver. And then instead of a supplement, look for a food that could replace that instead of a supplement.
Yeah, I mean, if we think about the simplicity of food versus supplementation, there's an idea of how it's being made. And so, a lot of protein powders have lots of gums because they have to stabilize it. They have a lot of carrageenan. They have certain types of thickeners or stabilizing agents, right? Mm-hmm. And so if we're putting ourselves in a constant we're trying to get a supplement, right? How is it made is a first factor, right? And so you got to kind of go into why they make it. Well, it's a product that can sit on a shelf.
Yeah. It's
a product that can stay on the shelf up to 6 months to a year if they can. So what you're looking at is, food, real food doesn't sit on the shelf. No. You can't.
It's definitely, they're not always considering it being the highest quality nutrient dense food that's going to be right for your body. Let's put it that way.
And they have to be broken down, right?
Yeah.
It has to be broken down in your body. And so you're looking at different types of mechanisms to break these foods down. And right. So what is soy lectin? What is certain peptides that they put in, what they terms of what they're doing in terms of heating, oxidizing the products. Some of them have to be cleaned with hydrogen peroxide or alcohols or alkalides to break down into a powder form, right?
Right. And, and also your body, you have to think about what your body's used to taking in. So it's used to taking in food. But supplements take a lot. They actually do require a lot more work out of your body to assimilate. And so consider that as well. There is that. And supplements are, there's some supplements that are really essential that people really need to get things going. But we don't want to depend on supplements. We want to try food first, and we want to work, to get our nutrients from that first. So, yeah. So I think I think that about does it for the questions. Hopefully everybody got a little more clear on nuts and seeds, how that inhibits digestion, as well as what polyunsaturated fats do to the body, why these are bad fats, and what the good fats are, which are the saturated fats coming from butter, dairy, coconut oil, and healthy meats that are organic and that aren't fed soy and stuff like that.
Some of these proteins also have high levels of metals in them based on how they've been processed. And so if you're thinking about saving the planet and stuff, think about things about what's happening through your body, because that metal and all that gets contained in your body, then your body doesn't work as well. So one of the issues is that you're not going to be helpful to yourself or to the planet. Like there's just, Absolutely. You don't have the energy for it, right?
Right. Yeah. I agree with that. That's one thing we touched upon on one of our other shows too, about how, just being your best self can be the best thing for your community, for your planet, for everybody concerned, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Maja, for another amazing show. I hope we answered everybody's questions today. If you have any more questions, definitely head on over to our Facebook page. We have a Integrate Yourself podcast community page. Get on into that group and leave a question if you want us to address it on the show, as well as you can always join our online community that we're building, patreon.com/integrate yourself. And head on over to Maja's website at majagottlieb.com and my website at pureenergypdx.com to contact us or work with us. We'd love to work with you as well. So thank you guys so much for listening and watching. Until next time.
Thank you guys.
Bye.
Bye.